Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Leverett Ball Show. And on this episode, I am joined by Jacob Wilkins. And sports fans, you likely remember this guy well. He's done a lot. He's done some broadcasting for MLB Network. He's done some broadcasting in the New York Mets system with the Binghamton Rumble Ponies, the AA affiliate. And he's also done college games for Binghamton University and a few other schools. And Jacob, I know I mentioned only some of your accomplishments. I mean, if I listed the whole resume, I mean, pretty much the entire episode would just be introing you. But what's it been like, through the years recently with some of the success you had, and recently or not that long ago, adding MLB Network to your resume? I mean, how has it been kind of processing this whole experience?
Well, first of all, Leverett, thanks for having me on. Second, thanks for the intro, the very generous introduction. And third, I want your audience to stay with the podcast, so I don't want to bore them with my entire biography, which is also a sleeping aid. No, it's been great. The last we're just coming off of it's another great October, as you mentioned. This work now in my third season that I do with MLB Network, and it's through Major League Baseball as well. And MLB Network produces these postseason games that air internationally in India. So it was an incredible stretch, as I'm sure all your viewers and listeners know, an incredible postseason, and had the chance. Our entire crew, because it's a full production in Secaucus, New Jersey. We did 19 games in 21 days through the league championship series. So, what a cool experience to cover all these great moments. The 15 inning Tigers Mariners game, the Shohei Ohtani three-homer game, the Springer home run in game seven of the ALCS. And then that came on the heels of the Rumble Ponies. You mentioned the Mets AA affiliate, who I've uh, been the director of broadcasting and media relations for since 2019. They won the Eastern League Championship. So our year there went all the way till the end of September, and then it perfectly went right into the playoffs.
Well, and I mean, for casual sports fans who don't exactly understand how everything works behind the scenes in broadcasting, so I know like different leagues, like you mentioned, you broadcasted you did some MLB broadcasts that were televised in India, and
Right.
you'll see like at NFL games, they'll have a Mexican version of the broadcast that's broadcast in Mexico, and I mean, for these different international broadcasts of American sports, are they always in for the different countries? Are they always in English or foreign languages? And how does everything sort of work?
Yeah, so at least for our broadcast, it's in English, and it's on Star India, the distributor in India, and certainly Major League Baseball. It's incredible the global reach, both in events they've had Japan, in London with that series, um, and the World Baseball Classic coming up again next year, and just MLB Network themselves and Major League Baseball have do BBC broadcasts, and the World Series has an international broadcast. So there's a lot of different ways that the game is being broadcast globally. And it's just a privilege to be, a part of that. And our analyst, Manish Batavia and Ayush Sharma in India, um, really growing the game in that market is terrific. And it's fun to see them learn as well and see these cool postseason moments and sort of how they react to it.
That's pretty cool the way they're growing the game. And I mean, you've done that stuff, a lot in the baseball world. Like I said, the MLB Network stuff, the stuff in the Mets minor league system. I mean, and I hate when people ask me what's my favorite sport to broadcast because I kind of like to do everything. But even though I hate that question, I mean, I'm going to ask you anyway. I'm a hypocrite. What is baseball your favorite sport to broadcast?
And I totally, I sort of, feel the same way in that I've always prided myself on being a guy that can do multiple sports, and that's sort of how I grew up. The people I grew up idolizing in the broadcasting world, Dick Enberg, Brent Musburger, Joe Buck, all multi-sport announcers. And so I love football. I went to Penn State, and so college football is near and dear to me. I'm watching the NFL games yesterday, like everyone else. I think football is a great sport to call. College basketball, basketball in general, and we were talking off air about volleyball. I mean, to me, if it's out there, I'll learn it. I remember I joined
Yeah.
Patriot League, a track and field championship. I thought it was great because I think we all love just telling the stories and the excitement of the competition. Baseball certainly, and it's funny. Before I joined Binghamton, I was with WFAN and CBS Sports Radio was called at the time now Infinity Sports Network, which was the national arm, and Sirius XM. And there I was anchoring updates, and there you really had to know a lot of sports because, for instance, on Sirius XM, it was like you might be doing updates for MLB Network Radio and NFL Radio. And those fans are really tuned in to every detail of those sports if they're listening to that channel. At FAN, you really had to be tuned into the New York sports scene because folks are following. If you're hosting a show on FAN today, Brandon Nimmo being traded along with the Jets and Giants is probably the top story. Nationally, it's probably NFL. So that was a good training ground from the anchoring standpoint of being able to handle multiple sports. And during that time, I was always calling a variety of collegiate sports, but certainly I always see baseball as a foundation of what I do and proud to say that.
100%. Yeah, and it's important to be versatile. It's funny. I did yesterday. I did a swimming race on ESPN Plus,
Oh,
which
cool.
that wasn't when I was becoming a broadcaster. I wasn't like can't wait to be a swimming announcer. But you do everything that comes your way,
Yeah.
and so 100%. And I mean, it sounds like you've done a lot. Also, I mean, with specifically Binghamton, we both had a chance to broadcast some games there. I know you've done some basketball games for them. Um, and you were also at one point hosting a video series, Bearcat Chats. I'm not sure if you're
Yeah.
still doing that,
Yeah.
but and it's funny because I did some games at Binghamton this past fall, and the first thing that jumped out to me was how cool their facilities are. I
Yep.
remember when I walked into their arena, I mean, probably the first time I've ever felt cool in my life, walking into their big arena and sitting at the broadcast table.
Yeah.
But I mean, what's your experience been like working with them?
Well, they're first rate there, and in athletics and university wide, folks like Jeremy Donovan and John Hartrick and David O'Brien. I mean, terrific people. I taught a course at the university as well as an adjunct professor for a couple of years in sports journalism, and having people like Dave O'Brien come and speak. I mean, those students are so lucky to have someone of Dave's breadth of experience. And so they're top notch, and all the people on the crew and other people like Tim Hyman, who was my predecessor with the Rumble Ponies, who does is their lead announcer for basketball. So from top down, it's first rate. Funny you mentioned Bearcat Chats. I was actually at the game with the person who was that was created during COVID, because obviously we didn't have a baseball season, and very generously, I had just started just doing some freelance work with the university in their communications and marketing department, university wide. And then COVID hit, and they were generous enough to keep me on. And we were sort of like, well, everyone's remote. Let's create, a series where we're interviewing different people by Zoom when Zoom was like this new thing. Um, and it would range from the person that was the head of food and services for students that were on campus to someone that was in sports, or someone that was running the food pantry. And then we sort of spun it off into an alumni Bearcat Chats, interviewing different alumni. And yeah, I really enjoy interviewing as well, and it's fun sometimes to also veer out of just the sports world and talk about things that are just university wide sort of topics. And that was I'll forever be grateful to the university for creating that opportunity, particularly at that fraught time.
Well, and I mean, yeah, and it was a crazy time during COVID. Lots of people worrying about, being able to remain employed with so many things shutting down. But that's great that you had such a good experience at Binghamton. Also, you mentioned, in addition to calling games, you like to, interview people and also talk about subjects outside of sports. I mean, that's relatable for me because on this podcast, I have people in the sports world as guests, but I also have non-sports people. Actually, the episode for this podcast that I published yesterday was I interviewed a guy who was a contestant on the reality show Love Is Blind. So
Yeah.
I have kind of a broad spectrum of different types of people on this podcast, not only people in sports.
Yeah.
So I know what you mean. It's fun to talk to various different types of people and interview different types of people. And also, you mentioned you were briefly an adjunct professor at Binghamton. And are you still doing that at all, or was that kind of a temporary thing? And also, what was it like? I know you've done a lot of broadcasting, but in the classroom setting, teaching broadcasting.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't call it temporary. I was doing it for about, I'd always do it in the fall semester because the spring semester with baseball was a little crazy to manage both. But I did, it's funny, I started doing that. That was an idea I had really before COVID, and then obviously that sort of put everything on pause. And my mother taught special ed in Brooklyn for 30 years. So there's always been education in our family, and I certainly am not even a 16th of the teacher she is. And she's happily and well deservedly retired now in Florida. But for me, it was really satisfying creating a syllabus and launching that off the ground at Binghamton. And it started doing it as like an asynchronous type semester that, where you weren't even seeing the students. And then we expanded it once everyone was back in campus to a full semester. And I would definitely do it again. It just collided schedule wise with the MLB work I was doing. But so I say I'm on sabbatical. I think that's the higher education term as a professor. But for me, Leverett, it was very natural because I've always taken a lot of pride in giving back to my alma mater. And even though I've never been an adjunct at Penn State, I really found the mentoring part to be gratifying. I've been on one of the alumni boards at our college and have done a lot of stuff mentoring wise through that. And so that actually, I think, was a prompt to me to think, hey, can I do this on a more day-to-day basis? And then through the help of others, developed a syllabus for the class. And I loved it because it was just so interesting. It helped me understand what the next generation, not to age myself, how they were consuming news, to be able to use examples of clips and get their thoughts, and it was a very interactive class, and that the projects were like, hey, you're going to go to a sporting event and write a game recap or do an interview, and we're gonna, break it down sort of how it went, or do a digital project like a podcast. So their final project was to create a website. No final exam, but to create a website, because in this business, Leverett, that's how you're employable. So whether they wanted to pursue broadcasting specifically or not, I think it was hopefully a really valuable course for them to take. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's funny because my dad is a college professor. He teaches economics, so he's in a very different world than I
Hmm.
am. But I don't know. That'd be pretty funny if I followed in his footsteps and maybe someday I followed your path and did some broadcasting and worked as an adjunct professor. I don't know, but maybe following in my dad's footsteps a little bit as a college educator. Although safe to say, macroeconomics and sports broadcasting are a little bit different.
You know what business though, and that's that we did some like sports business in the class, and like
Mm.
I think having a business background and understanding the dollars and cents is always good, and just marketing and those sorts of things. So yeah, maybe it's not so far apart, Lever.
Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm more like my dad than I think. Who knows?
Right,
But
right.
but I mean, also as far as we've talked about all the different things you've done, but down the road, and I'm going to ask you another question that I hate when people ask me, but I mean, do you see yourself doing more MLB stuff or NFL or maybe the voice of Penn State football someday, or what do you see yourself doing, a few years down the road?
Well, the last one Steve Jones is doing a great job at, and Steve to me is like one of the best, if not the best college, broadcaster out there to me that's doing football and basketball on the radio. I'm biased, but I think anyone that listens to Steve is would walk away pretty impressed, and he's been a mentor and a friend to me for since I was a student. Levery, a lot of those things are sometimes out of our control, and at least the timing of it can be out of our control. Of course, everything you mentioned, baseball and more MLB stuff, more NFL would be great. I'd love to do it. And you just try to put yourself in a position where you can say yes, and where, as you know, at the very least, what you can control, no matter what level game you're doing, is the type of work you're doing and what your reputation is. And hopefully that stands on its own. And then, I'm a believer, as I'm sure you can relate in all that you're doing, that, luck is the residue of hard work and design. And hopefully, those things come together.
Yeah, I agree. I think also, when people catch breaks and they get great opportunities, that's because they are willing to go for it in the first place. And, I
Mhm.
think in sports broadcasting, it's very competitive. So, I mean, I've, been able to land different jobs with college teams and pro teams over the years, but I've also had, teams I've applied to that didn't hire me. And I think having the guts to shoot your shot and get rejected eventually puts you in a position to capitalize when an opportunity comes your way. Um,
Yep.
and so, yeah, so I think you kind of, like you said, you kind of create your own luck to a degree.
Yeah, you got to be in the arena, right? And you think you try to put yourself in a position where you're a qualified, part of the crowd, and yeah, you have to reach out to at least get a no. That's for sure. And
What,
I always think, Lever, too, sometimes if a person responds, maybe there's not an opportunity at that moment, but I think it was Katie Kirk that said no is just the start of a conversation. And so rarely do I find, whether it's in a specific opportunity or just developing a relationship with someone in the business, that it's a hard no and we're not going to communicate again. I usually think it's the start of building a relationship.
I agree. I agree. Well, it's funny because, like, I did some sideline reporting for arena football for a few years. And it's so funny because when I first got out of college, I reached out to that team about working for them. They didn't have any opportunities, but
Hmm.
their main broadcaster said that I could send him my demo reels and he could give me some pointers and I could like job shadow at games and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I did that for a while, and then maybe a solid 2.5 years later, they needed a sideline reporter and they knew who I
Yep.
was. So you're
Yep.
right. I mean, it was initially a no, but it started a relationship. And so, yeah, having you on my podcast, I'm hoping that it's the start of me maybe being the next Jacob Wilkins someday. I mean, who knows? You never.
Well, Leverett, I really thought you're an insightful interviewer until you said that. I don't think you want that. No, but no, it's right. It's all relationships, and you see it in the minor league world as well, where you get to know the other broadcasters, and there's that comfort level. That's really, to me, a big thing. Are you comfortable with the person? And I think that's what people who are hiring look for as well.
I mean, also, a few more questions to
Yeah.
ask before we wrap up. You mentioned how much you enjoy, mentoring. When do you, and you, like I said, you've been an adjunct professor, you coach different young broadcasters. When do you, and I know you mentioned your mother was a special education teacher, so the kind of teaching, nurturing personality, maybe she passed on to you, but when did you really get interested in helping young broadcasters advance their career?
Yeah, and I give my credit to my mother and my father, who that was just always instilled, that to be kind. My dad's in insurance, and very different than broadcasting, but relationship driven, right? And people trusting you with, like, the most important information. And so I learned a lot from my dad too, just in how to treat people and how to do right by people. And I think going to Penn State was a huge part, because that's just such a part of the culture, the Center for Sports Journalism. From the time I was a junior in high school looking, I felt that nurturing environment and that, sort of family environment. And so that's sort of a responsibility to pay it forward, not just to Penn Staters, of course, but to folks entering the business, or doesn't matter if they're in the business longer and they just have a question. I think that just should always, I think that's one of the gratifying parts of doing this work, is that you get to develop those relationships and help others. Certainly, our industry, it's very competitive, but I don't know. To me, that's always a really great part of it. Talking to young folks and folks in general that are looking for advice.
I know we've talked a lot about everything you've accomplished in your career, but I also want to talk to you a little bit about your sports fandom and some of the sports you watch on your own
Mhm.
time when you're not broadcasting. So I know you're a huge Penn State fan, and are
Yeah.
you a big fan of all the different New York teams? And lately, we had the MLB postseason in October. We've had college football, we've had the NFL. What are the main things you're watching right now when you're off the air on your own time?
Yeah, well, it's fun, after the postseason came to a close. Or no, I'm sorry, it was before the postseason. I snuck in going to the Penn State Oregon game, and to go to a whiteout game, what an environment. Obviously, the season didn't go according to plan, but I still enjoy going to or watching games. And we're always watching as broadcasters from a different perspective, right? For better or worse, it's like the
Oh
movie
yeah,
producer going to a movie, and dissecting the
very
scene.
relatable. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's fun to break down the craft as well. And I've got some friends who, they're not in broadcasting, but they get it, and they're fun to watch a game with too. I grew up a Jets fan. Funny because I grew up in Long Island and about 5 minutes from Nassau Coliseum, but I became a Rangers fan growing up. Grew up a Jets fan because they did practice at Hofstra. But as when there's an opportunity, if there's ever an opportunity, you can always play. You're always down the middle when you're putting on the headset. I think those are two different sides of the brain. And we all sort of root for a good game at the end of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a challenge on Saturdays and Sundays for the teams I grew up rooting for this year. So, but I still love. I mean, watching the end of like the Eagles Cowboys game yesterday. I mean, it's exciting, and I love the Olympics, so I can't wait for that come February. Like you talked about swimming, and like, what a great Olympic sport. I mean, I know the Winter Olympics are coming up, but yeah, I enjoy reading a lot about sports as well, and profiles and books and that sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%. And it sounds like you have a full plate of different sports you watch. And you know what? I think you're a loyal fan if you mention you continue to support some of the teams you like, even when they haven't done well. You're not just a bandwagon guy. But,
Right.
also, for anyone listening who's, a hardcore Jacob Wilkins fan, where can they find you on the airwaves? And also, if they want to follow you on social media, what are your social media handles?
Yeah, at Jacob Wilkins on X. Jacob Wilkins. Funny, you're on social media and then you forget what your handles are. So I feel like
Yeah.
I should actually check what my Instagram handle is. I think I know it. Great marketing out of me. But I believe it's yes, Jacob Wilkins 7 on Instagram
Okay.
and uh, and on LinkedIn. And yeah, this is sort of an in-between time in terms of on the airwaves, but obviously still do the Binghamton University events when we're on ESPN Plus, and always doing different stuff before baseball season heats back up. So, but yeah, at Jacob Wilkins on X and Jacob Wilkins 7 on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok yet.
Aha. I
Admittedly, I feel like my social media presence or absorption, which is dangerous of late, has been dog videos. I really find them to be addicting.
yeah. Do you own dogs yourself? Are you a big dog
I
guy or?
I don't. I'm a big dog guy though.
Okay.
I'm a proud dog uncle. My sister has a boxer mix, And so once this dog Poppy is on Instagram, and the woman that's curating this content does a great job. She puts up little captions with the dog, and you
Oh
know,
man.
trying. She she needs to be tucked in, and the dog's watching an iPad. I mean, I'm very entertained, Leverett, by this stuff.
Very entertaining. Well, and I feel like being a dog uncle is the perfect thing because you get to hang out with the dog sometimes and have fun with the dog, but
Yeah.
you don't have to like walk it every day and bathe it and handle all the responsibilities.
Right.
So, and I'm in the same boat where I don't own pets, but I do like dogs. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I the dog uncle role sounds great. But yeah,
I'm
but
just asked to provide the gifts, and I happily do so. And my sister lives in Houston, so I don't get to see the dog as
oh
much as
man.
I can. So I pamper the dog, and we FaceTime, me and Evie.
Awesome, awesome. Well, and I guess my final question, I this is my third final question, but this will actually be
Oh,
the final one.
no,
But
no. Okay.
but Thanksgiving's right around the corner.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned your sister's in Texas, your mother retired to Florida. Are you flying all around the country for, or what are the Thanksgiving plans?
Yes, we're doing a meal a day or per hour. No,
Nice.
no, yeah, my folks are in. Yeah, my parents live in South Florida. They graduated from Long Island, and my sister's in Houston. So I don't. I just saw them actually um, in late October, and I will see them again in a few weeks. But we'll go down to my aunt and uncle in Long Island, where I'm from, for Thanksgiving.
Nice,
How
nice.
about
And
you?
I'm going to be in Pennsylvania. I have a bunch of relatives that live
What
there.
part?
So
Yeah.
I'm going to be near Philadelphia.
Okay.
So
Yep.
looking forward to it. And, maybe, we're both broadcasters. We can do like a play-by-play announcing of them serving the food. Like, finally the turkey or something like that. I don't know. But
You like that? I don't, people will ask for commentary and it's one thing if it's a bit, or
hmm
whatever, but even
right.
when I'm watching sports, it's like that, that's my off time. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know, it makes me uncomfortable a little bit.
Well, for me, I have to, like, all jokes aside, I have to actually be at a game to have the enthusiasm and energy to announce. But like,
Right.
it's funny because for a few years I did Uber part time,
Yeah,
and people in the Uber would be like, "Do a play-by-play call for me." But like, I'm
sure.
not at a game, caught up in the emotion of the game. So they'd be like in the Uber, they'd be like, "Do a play-by-play call for me," and I'd be like, "Okay, touchdown." Like, and just like no energy,
Yeah,
no effort.
yeah.
I
But
have
you
to
want the tip.
be,
You want to
yeah.
get tip. Yeah.
Exactly, but I have to be at the stadium. The fans are going crazy, and the pads are slamming together, and then I'm like touchdown, But yeah, on the
That's like a
spot, yeah,
cameo. Yeah, that's like a
right,
cameo, but in the Uber. Yeah.
exactly. So I don't know. I should have told them, let me focus on driving, but
You got to monetize it. Yeah.
exactly. But man, but it sounds like Jacob has some big Thanksgiving plans, and definitely catch him on the airwaves for some baseball and also some other college sports, and give him a follow on social media as well. But once again, everyone, that was our guest Jacob Wilkins. You've been listening to the Leverett Ball Show.